The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky coastline of Dragon's Rest Island, where the ancient dragon clans had made their home for over 3,000 years. Among the towering peaks and crystalline caves lived creatures of immense power and beauty, their scales gleaming like precious metals in the light. But in the deepest, darkest corner of the Crimson Scale territory, something moved that shouldn't have existed according to dragon law. Lyralii pressed herself against the cold stone wall of her prison cave, her pure white scales scraping against the barnacle-encrusted rocks that had become her only companions. Unlike her siblings who soared freely through the skies with scales of deep crimson and gold, she possessed something that marked her as cursed in the eyes of her kind: the pale, translucent scales of an albino dragon. Her sister Piritha had been the one to discover her condition 3 years ago, during their coming-of-age ceremony, when young dragons first revealed their true scale colors. While Piritha emerged with magnificent scarlet scales that caught fire in the sunlight, Lyralii's transformation revealed nothing but ghostly white, nearly transparent scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. An abomination, the Dragon Council had declared immediately, a sign of weakness in the bloodline that must be contained. Elder Thracones, their clan leader, had pronounced the sentence without hesitation. She will be bound to the tidal caves until her weakness no longer threatens our bloodline strength. Let the ocean's creatures claim her if they see fit. The tidal caves were a cruel punishment reserved for dragons who brought shame to their clans. Located at the base of the island where the ocean met the rocky shore, these caves flooded during high tide, leaving prisoners to cling to whatever surface they could find. Over time, barnacles, sea anemones, and other marine creatures made their homes on anything that remained stationary long enough. Lyralii had been chained to the cave wall for nearly 3 years now, the heavy iron shackles around her ankles preventing any hope of escape. The barnacles had begun growing on her scales within the first month, their sharp edges cutting into her flesh whenever she moved. Now, they covered most of her lower body, turning her into a living reef that provided shelter for small fish and crabs. The pain had become constant, a grinding ache that never left her conscious thoughts. But worse than the physical torment was the isolation. Dragons were social creatures by nature, meant to live in close family groups that shared their thoughts and emotions through mental bonds. Being cut off from that connection felt like losing a vital sense, leaving her mind echoing with silence where there should have been the warm presence of her clan. Piritha visited sometimes, though always in secret. She would approach the cave entrance during low tide, careful not to let any other clan members see her showing concern for the disgraced sister. The elders speak of arranging my mating flight with Karath of the Golden Peaks, Piritha had whispered during her last visit 2 months ago. They want to strengthen our bloodline after what happened with you. Lyralii had tried to respond, but her voice had grown weak from disuse and the constant moisture in the caves. I'm happy for you, she had managed to croak, though the words felt hollow. She genuinely wanted her sister to find happiness, but it stung to know that her own existence was seen as something that needed to be corrected through Piritha's future children. I brought you some fresh fish, Piritha had continued, dropping several silver salmon near Lyralii's reach. Try to stay strong. Maybe someday the elders will change their minds. But they both knew that wouldn't happen. Dragon law was absolute, and albino dragons were considered an evolutionary dead and that threatened the species' survival. The few historical records that mentioned them spoke of weakness, shortened lifespans, and inability to properly channel the flame magic that defined dragon identity. As winter approached, the storms grew more violent, and the tides reached higher into Lyralii's cave. She had learned to position herself carefully during high tide, wrapping her tail around a sturdy rock formation to keep from being swept out to sea. The barnacles made this increasingly difficult as they added weight and changed her center of balance. During one particularly fierce November storm, the tide rose higher than ever before. Lyralii found herself completely submerged for nearly an hour, holding her breath while fish swam through her hair and sea plants wrapped around her limbs. When the water finally receded, she discovered that several new colonies of marine life had taken up residence on her back, including a family of sea anemones whose stinging tentacles left burning welts across her shoulder blades. It was during this lowest point, when she had nearly given up hope of survival, that she first heard the unfamiliar voice echoing through her cave. "Hello, is someone down there?" The voice spoke in the common tongue, the language used for trade between species, rather than the ancient Draconic that clan members typically used among themselves. Lyralii lifted her head as much as the barnacle growth would allow, peering toward the cave entrance where faint torchlight flickered against the walls. "I can see chains," the voice continued, closer now. "Someone's been imprisoned here." A figure appeared at the edge of the cave entrance, silhouetted against the outside light. Even from her limited vantage point, Lyralii could see this was no dragon. The shape was too small, walking upright on 2 legs rather than 4, with no visible tail or wings. This was a human, which made no sense. Humans rarely visited Dragon's Rest Island, and when they did come, it was usually as part of carefully negotiated diplomatic missions that stayed far from clan territory. The human descended carefully into the cave, and Lyralii got her first clear look at her unexpected visitor. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with weather-beaten skin that spoke of long hours working outdoors. His brown hair hung in damp tangles around his shoulders, and his simple clothing looked suitable for travel rather than formal occasions. Most surprisingly, he showed no signs of fear despite being alone in dragon territory. "By the depths," he breathed when he saw her condition. "What have they done to you?" Lyralii tried to speak, but only managed a weak croak. The human immediately moved closer, seeming unconcerned by her massive size or the fact that she could theoretically incinerate him with dragon fire if she chose. "My name is Marcus Thorn," he said softly, setting down his torch in a secure holder carved into the cave wall. "I'm a marine biologist from the Northern Kingdoms. I came here to study the unique ecosystem around Dragon's Rest, but I never expected to find something like this." He approached her slowly, his eyes taking in the extent of the barnacle growth and the obvious signs of long-term imprisonment. His expression shifted through several emotions: shock, anger, and, finally, a determined resolve that reminded Lyralii of her sister's stubborn streak. "This is barbaric," Marcus continued, more to himself than to her. "Intelligent beings don't deserve to be treated like this, regardless of species differences." Lyralii managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You should leave. If they find you here, they'll what? Add me to their collection of prisoners." Marcus shook his head firmly. "I don't think so. Besides, I have diplomatic immunity. I'm here as part of an official research expedition approved by both our kingdoms." He moved closer, examining the barnacle growth with a clinical eye that suggested genuine scientific interest rather than mere curiosity. "These are causing you significant pain, aren't they? And they're restricting your movement." Lyralii nodded weakly. "They've been growing for years. I can't move properly anymore." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through options. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression of determination that she hadn't seen directed toward her since before her transformation. "I'm going to help you," he declared. "I specialize in marine ecosystems and symbiotic relationships. I know how to remove these creatures safely without causing additional harm." "Why?" Lyralii asked, genuinely confused. "You don't know me. My own clan considers me worthless." Marcus stood up, meeting her eyes directly despite the significant size difference between them. "Because what's happening here is wrong, and I have the knowledge to fix it. That's reason enough." He began unpacking supplies from his traveling bag, revealing tools that Lyralii didn't recognize, but that looked specifically designed for delicate work. "This is going to take time," he explained. "The barnacles have integrated with your scales in ways that could cause serious damage if removed incorrectly. But I think I can do this safely, a little bit at a time." "The tides," Lyralii warned. This cave floods twice daily. You'll drown if you're caught here during high tide. Marcus checked a complex mechanical device that he pulled from his pocket. Low tide is in 6 hours. That gives us enough time for me to make some progress and plan our approach. He looked around the cave, noting the high water marks on the walls. We'll need to work around the flooding schedule, but it's manageable. As he began his initial examination, Marcus kept up a steady stream of conversation that helped distract Lyralii from both her physical discomfort and her amazement at finding someone who wanted to help her. I've studied barnacle removal from ship hulls and whale surfaces, he explained while carefully probing the edges of one colony with a thin metal instrument. The key is understanding how they attach and finding ways to disrupt that attachment without damaging the underlying surface. His touch was gentle but confident, and for the first time in years, Lyralii felt something other than pain when someone made contact with the affected areas. Marcus seemed to instinctively understand how much pressure she could tolerate and adjusted his techniques accordingly. These particular barnacles are interesting, he continued, making notes in a waterproof journal. They've adapted to your scale chemistry in ways I haven't seen before. It's actually quite fascinating from a biological perspective, though I'm sure it's anything but pleasant for you. As he worked, Marcus shared stories about his research and travels, painting pictures of the wider world that Lyralii had never seen. He spoke of underwater cities built by merfolk, of great whale migrations that spanned entire continents, and of coral reefs that glowed with bioluminescent magic during the new moon. The ocean is full of cooperation, he said while carefully loosening a particularly stubborn cluster of barnacles near her hip. Species that seem incompatible, finding ways to help each other survive. What's happening to you here goes against everything I know about natural balance. By the time Marcus had to leave to avoid the incoming tide, he had successfully removed several small colonies and created a detailed plan for tackling the more established growth. More importantly, he had given Lyralii something she had lost years ago: hope. I'll be back tomorrow during the next low tide, he promised, packing his tools carefully. We're going to get you free from this. After he left, Lyralii found herself staring at the spots where he had removed the barnacles. Her scales underneath were pale and scarred, but they were clean and free to move naturally for the first time in years. The sensation was so overwhelming that she began to cry, her tears mixing with the tide pool water that remained in the cave. For the first time since her imprisonment began, she allowed herself to believe that her suffering might not be permanent. The next morning brought Piritha on one of her secret visits, and she immediately noticed the changes. Someone's been here, she said, alarm clear in her voice. These barnacles didn't remove themselves. Lyralii considered lying, but decided her sister deserved the truth. A human came. A scientist. He's trying to help me. Piritha's eyes widened in shock. A human? Lyralii, if the elders find out that outsiders have been interfering with your punishment, what more can they do to me? Lyralii asked quietly. I'm already dying slowly in this cave. At least this way, I might live long enough to see the sky again. Her sister was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with conflicting loyalties. Finally, she spoke in a voice heavy with guilt and determination. What do you need me to do? Marcus returned that afternoon as promised, carrying additional equipment and showing no signs of being deterred by the dangerous nature of his self-assigned mission. He had clearly spent time researching dragon physiology, as he came prepared with tools better suited to working with scales rather than standard marine environments. Your sister visited this morning, Lyralii informed him as he set up his workspace. She's willing to help, but she's scared of what the clan will do if they discover your involvement. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Understandable. What we're doing could be seen as interfering with internal dragon justice. But, from my perspective, this situation violates several interspecies treaties regarding the treatment of sentient beings. He began working on a large cluster near her left shoulder, his movements sure and steady. I've been thinking about the broader implications. If your clan is punishing genetic variations this severely, they might be inadvertently weakening their own species. Genetic diversity is crucial for long-term survival. Try explaining that to Elder Thracones, Lyralii said with bitter humor. He believes that only the strongest bloodlines should survive. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to evolutionary dead ends, Marcus replied, carefully loosening another section of barnacles. Some of the most successful species I've studied are those that embrace variation rather than trying to eliminate it. As the days passed, Marcus established a routine of visiting during low tides, steadily working to free Lyralii from her marine prison, while sharing knowledge about the natural world that challenged everything she had been taught about strength and survival. His presence became the highlight of her existence, not just because of the physical relief he provided, but because he treated her as an individual worth saving rather than a genetic mistake to be hidden away. Piritha began helping by bringing information about clan activities that might interfere with Marcus's work, allowing them to adjust their schedule when necessary. She also started bringing better food and medical supplies that helped Lyralii's body heal as the barnacles were removed. The elders have been asking questions about my frequent absences, Piritha admitted during one visit. I think they suspect something, but they haven't directly accused me of anything yet. Marcus had been working for nearly 2 weeks when they encountered their first serious obstacle. A massive colony of barnacles near Lyralii's spine had grown so extensively that their removal would require cutting through several layers of integrated growth. The procedure would be both painful and potentially dangerous, requiring steady hands and precise timing. "I can do this," Marcus assured her, showing her the surgical instruments he had acquired. "But it's going to hurt, and there's always some risk when working this close to nerve clusters." Lyralii met his gaze steadily. "I trust you, and even if something goes wrong, this is better than slowly dying covered in these things." The procedure took most of the available low-tide time, with Marcus working with intense concentration, while Piritha held Lyralii's head steady and offered what comfort she could. When it was finished, a section of Lyralii's back was free that hadn't been able to move properly in over 2 years. "The nerves are responding well," Marcus observed, cleaning his instruments. "You should start to regain normal sensation in that area within a few days." As they worked together over the following weeks, an unexpected friendship developed between the three of them. Marcus shared stories of his travels and research. Piritha provided insights into dragon culture and politics, and Lyralii found herself remembering what it felt like to be part of a group that valued her presence. "I never understood how limited our thinking was until I started talking with you," Piritha admitted one afternoon. "We've been so focused on traditional strength that we've ignored other forms of power." Marcus nodded. Every ecosystem needs diversity to remain stable. A forest isn't stronger because it has only oak trees. It's stronger because it has oaks and willows and ferns and countless other species all contributing different strengths. Lyralii felt something shift inside her as she listened to these conversations. For years, she had accepted the clan's judgment that her albino coloring made her weak and worthless. But Marcus's perspective suggested that her differences might actually represent untapped potential rather than evolutionary failure. "What if there are advantages to being different that we simply haven't discovered yet?" she wondered aloud. "That's exactly what I've been thinking," Marcus replied, his excitement evident. "Your scale chemistry is unlike anything I've encountered. Your sensory capabilities might be enhanced in ways that normal dragons can't access. Your connection to magic could operate on completely different frequencies." The possibility that she might possess hidden strengths rather than obvious weaknesses was revolutionary for Lyralii. For the first time, she began to wonder what she might be capable of if given the chance to explore her potential rather than simply survive her punishment. But their careful routine was about to face its greatest challenge yet. Elder Thracones had begun to notice Piritha's absences, and other clan members had reported strange scents near the tidal caves that suggested outsider presence. The discovery of Marcus's involvement was becoming inevitable, and, when it came, the consequences would extend far beyond Lyraliai's personal situation. The confrontation that would change everything was only days away. The storm struck Dragon's Rest Island on a Tuesday morning, bringing with it winds that howled through the peaks like the voices of ancient spirits demanding justice. Elder Thracones stood at the entrance to the great council chamber, his massive crimson form silhouetted against the lightning that split the sky. His golden eyes burned with a fury that made even the younger dragons step back in deference. "Karath has brought disturbing news," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Human scents have been detected near the tidal caves. Someone has been interfering with the punishment of the albino." Piritha felt her heart stop as she realized their secret was finally exposed. She stood among the gathered clan members, trying to maintain the appearance of casual interest while her mind raced through possible responses. Beside her, their parents exchanged worried glances that suggested they suspected her involvement. Karath, the golden dragon who had been courting Piritha, stepped forward with evident satisfaction at having discovered the transgression. The scent trail leads directly to the cave where the aberration is contained. Fresh human presence, repeated visits over several weeks. This represents a direct challenge to our authority. Moreover, Elder Thracones continued, his tail lashing with agitation. There are signs that the marine growth on the prisoner has been systematically removed. This level of interference suggests extensive contact with our internal affairs. The implications were clear to everyone present. Humans were not supposed to know about the tidal caves or their purpose. The fact that an outsider had not only discovered Lyraliai's existence, but had been actively working to help her represented a massive breach of clan security and dragon law. "Who among you has knowledge of this situation?" Thracones demanded, his gaze sweeping across the assembled dragons. "Speak now, and perhaps mercy will be shown." Piritha's throat felt constricted as she struggled with the decision. Revealing her involvement would likely result in severe punishment, possibly even exile. But remaining silent would mean abandoning both Lyraliai and Marcus to face the clan's wrath alone. Before she could gather the courage to speak, a commotion at the chamber entrance announced new arrivals. 2 clan guards entered, flanking a figure that made every dragon present tense with surprise and aggression. Marcus Thorn walked calmly between his escorts, showing no signs of fear despite being completely surrounded by beings who could incinerate him without effort. "I believe you're looking for me," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I'm the human who has been visiting your prisoner." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the storm wind whistling through the chamber's high windows. Elder Thracones descended from his elevated position, his massive form moving with a fluid grace that marked all dragons despite their size. "You dare enter our sacred spaces uninvited?" Thracones asked, each word dripping with menace. "You violate our laws and interfere with our justice?" Marcus stood his ground, though Piritha could see the slight tremor in his hands that betrayed his nervousness. "I came to study marine ecosystems. What I found was a sentient being subjected to prolonged torture. As a representative of the Northern Kingdoms and a member of the Interspecies Research Council, I am obligated to report such violations of established treaties." The mention of official treaties caused a stir among the clan members. Dragon's Rest Island existed under various agreements that allowed them autonomy in exchange for maintaining peaceful relations with neighboring kingdoms. Marcus's official status complicated the situation considerably. "The aberration's punishment is a matter of internal clan law," Thracones replied, though his tone had become more cautious. "Outsiders have no standing to interfere." "The Universal Rights Charter disagrees," Marcus countered, producing a scroll bearing official seals from his traveling pack. Article 7 clearly states that genetic variation cannot be grounds for imprisonment or torture among sentient species. The Northern Kingdoms are signatories to this charter, as is the Dragon Confederation. Piritha watched in amazement as Marcus calmly cited legal precedents and treaty obligations that seemed to catch the elder completely off guard. It was clear that Thracones had not expected to face formal legal challenges to what the clan considered internal discipline. Furthermore, Marcus continued, I have documented evidence of the prisoner's condition, including detailed recordings of the barnacle growth patterns and their impact on her health. This documentation has already been transmitted to my superiors as part of my regular research reports. The implications of this revelation rippled through the chamber. If Marcus's reports had already reached official channels, attempting to silence him would likely trigger formal investigations that could threaten the clan's autonomy agreements. Elder Thracones was clearly struggling to find a response that would maintain his authority while avoiding larger diplomatic consequences. Finally, he spoke with carefully controlled anger. Your interference has already been noted. What do you propose to resolve this situation? Marcus straightened, and Piritha could see the determination in his eyes that had driven him to help Lyralii despite the obvious dangers. I propose a formal evaluation of the prisoner's condition and treatment under neutral oversight. If the punishment is found to violate established standards for treatment of sentient beings, it should be ended immediately. And if we refuse this evaluation, Karath interjected, his golden scales flashing with aggression, then I will be forced to recommend that the Northern Kingdoms reconsider their diplomatic agreements with Dragon's Rest Island. Marcus replied calmly. The potential for serious sanctions exists when treaty obligations are violated. The chamber erupted in angry roars and heated discussion as clan members debated the unprecedented situation. Piritha realized this was her moment to act before the situation escalated beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. I have something to say, she announced, stepping forward despite her parents' urgent attempts to stop her. Elder Thracones turned his attention to her with obvious displeasure. Speak quickly, youngling. I have been helping the human, Piritha declared, her voice growing stronger as she committed fully to her decision. I guided him to Lyralii's location because I believe her treatment was unjust. I have witnessed his work, and I can confirm that his methods have been both gentle and effective. The announcement sent shock waves through the chamber. Piritha was a respected member of the clan, destined for an important mating alliance. Her betrayal of clan law represented a fundamental challenge to their social order. You have violated your oaths and betrayed your bloodline, Thracones said, his voice heavy with disappointment and rage. The consequences will be severe. Will they be as severe as watching my sister slowly die covered in barnacles while being told it's for the good of the clan? Piritha shot back, because that's what you've been asking me to accept for 3 years. Her boldness inspired other clan members to speak up, voices that had been silent during the initial imposition of Lyralii's punishment. Several younger dragons stepped forward to express doubts about the harshness of the sentence, while others questioned whether albino coloring truly represented the threat to clan strength that tradition claimed. The old laws were made when our understanding was limited, one of them argued. Perhaps it's time to reconsider whether difference always means weakness. Marcus watched these developments with growing hope, recognizing that the clan itself was beginning to question practices that had been accepted without challenge for generations. He had provided the external pressure necessary to force examination of internal policies, but the real change would have to come from within dragon society itself. Elder Thracones could see his authority being undermined by the spreading dissent. In an attempt to regain control, he made a decision that would prove to be a critical mistake. Enough, he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber with magical enhancement. The human will be escorted to the tidal caves to witness the results of his interference. Let him see what becomes of those who defy dragon law. The implied threat was clear. Thracones intended to use Marcus's execution as an object lesson to both the clan and any future outsiders who might consider challenging their authority. But he had underestimated both Marcus's resourcefulness and the depth of change that their intervention had already triggered within the clan. As the group made their way to the coastal caves, storm winds whipping around them with increasing intensity, Piritha managed to position herself near Marcus during the descent. "There's something you need to know," she whispered urgently. "Lyralii isn't as powerless as everyone believes. Her albino coloring isn't just a cosmetic difference. It affects how she processes magical energy. I've seen her do things that normal dragons can't, but she doesn't understand her own abilities." Marcus absorbed this information quickly. "What kind of things?" "She can see in complete darkness, not just the low-light vision normal dragons have. She can sense magical energies from much greater distances. And during storms like this one, her scales actually absorb electrical energy from lightning strikes rather than being harmed by them." This revelation changed everything. If Lyralii possessed enhanced abilities rather than genetic weaknesses, her albino condition might represent evolution rather than devolution. The implications for how dragon society understood genetic variation were profound. They reached the cave entrance just as the tide was beginning to rise, though the storm surge was making the water more violent than usual. Elder Thracones led the group inside, clearly intending to make a dramatic demonstration of his authority. But what they found in the cave was not what anyone expected. Lyralii hung suspended from her chains as always, but her appearance had transformed dramatically since Marcus's last visit. The systematic removal of the barnacle colonies had revealed scale patterns unlike anything any of them had seen before. Her white scales seemed to pulse with an internal light that grew brighter as the storm's electrical activity increased overhead. More surprising still, she appeared to be actively communicating with the marine life that remained in the cave. Schools of small fish swirled around her in complex patterns that suggested coordinated movement rather than random behavior. Sea anemones that normally remained stationary had positioned themselves in arrangements that seemed almost decorative. "What is this?" Elder Thracones demanded, clearly unsettled by the unexpected scene. Marcus stepped forward, his scientific training helping him interpret what he was observing. "She's created a symbiotic ecosystem. Instead of being consumed by the marine life, she's learned to work with it cooperatively." The implications were staggering. Normal dragons typically dominated their environments through force and magical power. But Lyralii had developed an entirely different approach based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Her albino condition hadn't made her weak. It had allowed her to evolve different survival strategies that might actually be superior in certain situations. "Lyralii," Piritha called softly. "Can you hear us?" Her sister's eyes opened, and several clan members stepped back in shock. Instead of the normal golden dragon eyes they expected, Lyralii's were a pale silver that seemed to reflect light in ways that made it difficult to look directly at them. "I can hear all of you," Lyralii replied, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I can sense your emotions, your intentions, even your fears." Elder Thracones moved closer, his expression shifting between anger and confusion. "What has been done to you? What magic is this?" "No magic was done to me," Lyralii explained calmly. "This is what I am, what I've always been, but never had the chance to understand. The human didn't just remove the barnacles. He helped me realize that my differences weren't weaknesses to be hidden." Marcus approached carefully, aware that the situation had become much more complex than anyone had anticipated. The electrical activity from the storm is being absorbed by her scales and converted into a form of bioluminescent energy. It's an adaptation I've theorized about, but never seen in practice. As if to demonstrate his point, a massive lightning bolt struck the cliff above the cave entrance. Instead of the expected crash and damage, the electrical energy seemed to flow down through the rock and into Lyralii's scales, which brightened noticeably in response. "She's essentially become a living lightning rod," Marcus continued, "but instead of being harmed by electrical energy, she's learned to harness it. This could represent an evolutionary advancement rather than a genetic flaw." The storm surge chose that moment to send a massive wave crashing into the cave, flooding it completely and threatening to sweep away everyone present. Normal dragons would have been forced to retreat or use their fire magic to create air pockets, but Lyralii did something unprecedented. Her scales flared with brilliant white light, and the chaotic water around them suddenly organized into a protective barrier that held the sea at bay while allowing everyone to breathe normally. The marine life in the cave, fish, anemones, even tiny crabs, moved in perfect coordination to maintain the barrier's integrity. Impossible! Elder Thracones breathed, his worldview cracking under the weight of what he was witnessing. Not impossible, Pirithous said, her voice filled with pride and vindication. Different. She's not a weak dragon. She's a new kind of dragon. The protective barrier held until the wave receded, at which point Lyralii gently released the magical energy and allowed the cave to return to its normal state. But the demonstration had fundamentally changed how everyone present understood both her abilities and the nature of dragon evolution. Marcus realized that this was the moment he had been working toward, though he hadn't fully understood it until now. The question isn't whether Lyralii deserves punishment for being different. The question is whether your clan can recognize that she might represent the future of dragon development. Elder Thracones stared at the albino dragon who had just saved all their lives using abilities that defied everything he thought he knew about dragon capabilities. The political implications were staggering. If Lyralii's differences represented evolution rather than devolution, then the clan's treatment of her became not just cruel, but actively harmful to their species' development. "This changes everything," he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of recognition. But accepting that change would require more than just acknowledging Lyralii's abilities. It would mean restructuring fundamental assumptions about dragon society, genetic variation, and the nature of strength itself. And there were still clan members who would resist such dramatic shifts in their understanding of the world. The confrontation in the cave had resolved the immediate crisis, but it had also opened questions that would challenge dragon society for generations to come. Lyralii's freedom was no longer the only issue at stake. The future direction of her entire species hung in the balance. As the storm began to subside, and the group prepared to return to the clan's stronghold, Marcus caught Lyralii's eye and saw something there that had been missing during all his previous visits. For the first time since her imprisonment began, she looked like a dragon who believed in her own worth. The real work of transformation was just beginning. 6 months after the confrontation in the tidal caves, Dragon's Rest Island had become a place that none of its inhabitants would have recognized from the previous year. The changes began small, but spread through every aspect of clan life like ripples from stone dropped into still water. Lyralii stood at the peak of Mount Draconus, no longer the broken prisoner she had been, but not yet fully integrated into the new society that was slowly emerging around her. The chains that had bound her for 3 years were gone, replaced by the freedom to explore abilities that she was still learning to understand. Her white scales caught the morning sunlight and seemed to transform it into something entirely new, a soft radiance that made her visible for miles across the island. Below her, the clan's stronghold buzzed with activity that would have been unthinkable before Marcus's intervention. Dragons worked alongside human researchers who had arrived as part of a formal cultural exchange program. Young dragons attended classes where they learned about genetic diversity and evolutionary adaptation instead of just traditional combat techniques and flame mastery. Most remarkably, several other dragons with previously hidden differences had come forward to explore their own unique capabilities. "The transformation is remarkable," Marcus said, approaching from the path that led up the mountain. His 6 months on the island had changed him as well. His initial mission to study marine ecosystems had evolved into something much larger, a comprehensive examination of how different species could learn from each other rather than simply coexisting. Lyralii turned to greet him, her movement graceful in ways that would have been impossible when the barnacles restricted her mobility. "I still can't believe how much has changed. Sometimes I wake up and expect to find myself back in the cave." Change this significant takes time to feel real. Marcus agreed, settling beside her on the rocky outcrop. Your clan is essentially rewriting thousands of years of tradition. That doesn't happen overnight. The transformation hadn't been easy. Elder Thracones had initially resisted the implications of Lyraliai's demonstration, attempting to maintain that her abilities were an aberration that didn't challenge fundamental assumptions about dragon development. But the arrival of official investigators from the Interspecies Research Council had forced a formal evaluation that confirmed Marcus's initial assessments. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead xenobiologist on the investigation team, had been particularly fascinated by Lyraliai's unique capabilities. Her official report had classified the albino condition as a potentially beneficial genetic variation that merits protection and study rather than suppression. The legal implications had been significant. Dragon's Rest Island's autonomy agreements included provisions for protecting endangered populations and genetic variations. Lyraliai's case had triggered those protections, requiring the clan to demonstrate that they could provide appropriate care for dragons with similar conditions. Piritha tells me that 3 more albino hatchlings have been born this breeding season. Marcus continued. That's unprecedented, according to the clan records. Lyraliai nodded, her expression thoughtful. Their parents came to me for advice about how to care for them. It's strange being considered an expert on something that I'm still learning about myself. The emergence of additional albino dragons had surprised everyone, including the researchers. Dr. Vasquez theorized that the genetic variation had always been present in the population, but had been actively suppressed through selective breeding practices designed to eliminate undesirable traits. Your sister has been essential in helping the families adapt, Marcus observed. She's become quite the advocate for genetic diversity. Piritha had indeed transformed from a conflicted sister into a passionate reformer. Her engagement to Karath had been called off when she refused to accept breeding contracts that excluded genetic variations from future offspring. Instead, she had begun working with younger clan members to establish new social structures that value diversity over conformity. The hardest part is helping everyone understand that different doesn't mean inferior, Lyraliai said. For so long, our entire culture has been built around the idea that there's one correct way to be a dragon. This challenge extended beyond just albino dragons. The clan's new openness to variation had revealed that several members possessed abilities that had been hidden or suppressed because they didn't fit traditional expectations. One dragon could communicate directly with weather patterns, influencing storm systems in ways that normal flame magic couldn't achieve. Another had developed enhanced empathic abilities that allowed her to sense the emotions of other species across vast distances. The research station is almost complete, Marcus said, gesturing toward the construction visible in the valley below. Once it's operational, we'll be able to study these variations systematically and help other clans understand the benefits of genetic diversity. The establishment of the permanent research facility had been Lyraliai's idea. Rather than simply correcting the injustices of the past, she wanted to create a foundation for understanding dragon evolution that could prevent similar problems in the future. Dr. Vasquez believes that albino dragons might be nature's way of preparing your species for environmental changes, Marcus continued. Your ability to harness electrical energy could become crucial if climate shifts alter the magical balances that normal dragons depend on. This evolutionary perspective had gradually won over even the most traditional clan members. Instead of viewing genetic variations as threats to be eliminated, they were beginning to understand them as adaptive advantages that could ensure species survival. Elder Thracones approached them along the mountain path, his massive form moving with the careful deliberation that had characterized his interactions with Lyraliai since the cave incident. The relationship between them remained complex, shaped by years of injustice that couldn't be easily forgotten despite the current reforms. The Council of Elders has reached a decision regarding your proposal, he announced without preamble. Lyraliai had submitted a formal request to establish new clan laws that would protect dragons with genetic variations and ensure they received appropriate education, and support rather than punishment. The proposal had been debated extensively, representing the most significant legal reform in clan history. The proposal is accepted, Furcones continued, his tone carefully neutral, with modifications to ensure implementation can be managed effectively across all clan territories. The announcement was momentous, but Lyraliai's response was tempered by the knowledge of how much suffering could have been prevented if such protections had existed years earlier. "What about reparation for dragons who were harmed under the previous laws?" she asked directly. Furcones was quiet for several moments before responding. "That matter is still under discussion. The complexities are significant, as you might imagine." Marcus could see the tension in this exchange. While the clan had accepted the need for future reforms, addressing past injustices remained problematic for leaders who had been responsible for implementing the harmful policies. Perhaps, Marcus suggested carefully, the focus should be on ensuring the new protections are comprehensive enough to prevent future harm while establishing support systems for those who were affected by previous policies. It was a diplomatic way of acknowledging that perfect justice for past wrongs might be impossible while still insisting on meaningful change going forward. "The research station will serve that function in part," Furcones agreed. "Dragons with unique abilities will have access to specialized training and support that was previously unavailable." Lyraliai accepted this compromise, though Marcus could see she wasn't entirely satisfied. Her experiences had taught her that systems of oppression were easier to modify than to completely transform, but she was committed to working within the possible rather than demanding the perfect. As Elder Furcones departed, Piritha arrived with a group of the young albino dragons who had been born since the reforms began. Their parents followed at a respectful distance, still learning how to interact with children whose abilities they didn't fully understand. "Lyraliai, could you show them the lightning absorption technique?" Piritha asked. "They're curious about how it works." The request was simple, but its implications were profound. Instead of hiding their abilities or being ashamed of their differences, these young dragons were being encouraged to explore their potential with guidance from someone who had learned to thrive despite facing persecution. Lyraliai smiled and began explaining the basic principles of electrical energy absorption while the hatchlings watched with rapt attention. Their scales, still developing their adult patterns, showed the same pearlescent quality that had marked her as different from birth. "The key is understanding that our scales don't just reflect magic," she explained, demonstrating by allowing small sparks to dance between her claws. "They can absorb and transform different types of energy that normal dragons can't access." Marcus watched this teaching session with deep satisfaction. The work he had begun by simply trying to help one suffering individual had evolved into something that would benefit generations of dragons. But more than that, it had demonstrated principles about cooperation and understanding that had applications far beyond this single species. Dr. Vasquez approached from the research station, carrying equipment for the day's experiments. The ongoing studies of albino dragon abilities had attracted attention from scientists across multiple kingdoms, establishing Dragon's Rest Island as a center for evolutionary research. "We're ready for the storm simulation tests," she announced. "If you're willing to participate, Lyraliai, we should be able to gather data that will help us understand the full extent of your electrical processing capabilities." These experiments were designed to document albino dragon abilities in ways that could be shared with other clans and research institutions. The goal was to build a comprehensive understanding of genetic variations that could guide policy development across the dragon territories. "The results so far have exceeded all our projections," Dr. Vasquez continued, setting up monitoring equipment. "Your bioelectrical capacity appears to be several orders of magnitude higher than anything we've seen in other dragon subspecies." As they prepared for the experiment, Marcus reflected on how much his own understanding had grown during his time on the island. His initial mission had been straightforward scientific research, but he had learned that meaningful discovery required more than just observation. It demanded the willingness to challenge unjust systems when they interfered with the pursuit of knowledge. The storm simulation began with artificially generated electrical fields that gradually increased in intensity. Lyralii positioned herself in the center of the testing area, her scales beginning to glow as they absorbed the energy being directed toward her. "Remarkable," Dr. Vasquez muttered, monitoring the readings. "She's not just absorbing the electrical energy, she's converting it into a form that can be stored and redistributed. This is fundamentally different from how normal dragons process magical energy." The young albino dragons watched in fascination as Lyralii demonstrated abilities that they were just beginning to develop in themselves. Their parents observed with a mixture of pride and wonder that would have been impossible under the previous clan laws. "The implications for dragon society are enormous," Dr. Vasquez continued, taking detailed notes. "If environmental changes make traditional magical sources less reliable, albino dragons could become essential for species survival rather than being seen as burdens." As the experiment concluded, Lyralii released the stored electrical energy in a controlled discharge that illuminated the entire mountaintop with brilliant white light. The display was beautiful and powerful, a perfect demonstration of abilities that had been suppressed and hidden for generations. "This is what we could have had all along," Pirithous said softly, watching her sister command forces that normal dragons couldn't even perceive. "If we had been willing to see difference as strength rather than weakness." Marcus nodded, understanding that the lessons learned here extended far beyond dragon society. The challenge now is making sure other communities don't repeat the same mistakes. Change is only meaningful if it spreads beyond the place where it begins. The research station was already receiving inquiries from dragon clans across the continent, many of whom had their own suppressed populations with genetic variations. The work being done on Dragon's Rest Island was becoming a model for how traditional societies could adapt to embrace diversity rather than fearing it. As the day ended and the various groups began to disperse, Lyralii found herself alone with Marcus on the mountaintop where their conversation had begun. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice carrying emotions that were difficult to express. "Not just for removing the Barnacles, but for seeing me as someone worth saving when my own clan had given up on me." Marcus smiled, looking out over the island that had become so much more than a research site. "I learned as much from you as you learned from me. Maybe more. You taught me that meaningful science requires moral courage, not just intellectual curiosity." "What will you do now that the research station is established?" Lyralii asked. "Continue the work," Marcus replied. "There are other places where similar injustices exist, other species dealing with their own versions of genetic discrimination. The principles we've developed here can be applied anywhere that diversity is seen as a threat rather than a resource." Lyralii spread her wings, preparing to glide down to the valley where her sister and the young dragons were waiting. "Then, perhaps we'll work together again someday. There's still so much to learn about what's possible when differences are celebrated instead of suppressed." As she launched herself from the mountain peak, her white scales caught the setting sun and transformed it into something that seemed to light up the entire island. Marcus watched until she disappeared into the evening shadows, carrying with her the hope that the changes they had begun would continue to spread far beyond the boundaries of Dragon's Rest Island. The albino dragon sister who had once been left to suffer under Barnacles had become a symbol of transformation and possibility. Her story would be told for generations, inspiring others to question unjust traditions and fight for the recognition that every being deserved the chance to discover their own unique strengths. The future remained unwritten, but it had become a future where difference was no longer a curse to be hidden, but a gift to be cherished and protected.